dream destinations, exceptional cruises, polar adventures. Welcome to Beyond the Horizon, the podcast that takes you where the journey truly begins, a production of Area Voyages.
So, imagine trying to launch a startup today. Usually, you build this buggy prototype in a garage, you push it live, and, well, when it inevitably crashes, you just call it a beta version.
Right, the classic move fast and break things model.
Exactly. You iterate, the founder standing on a stage somewhere in a t-shirt pointing to this really messy piece of software, and the whole world just applauds the scrappiness of it all. We really romanticize that idea, right? Moving fast and breaking things.
We do, yeah. And I mean, that approach works beautifully when you're building, say, a photo sharing app or like a new project management tool.
Sure.
The stakes for failure there are incredibly low. Like if the app crashes, the user just refreshes the page. No big deal.
Right. But then you step into the world of ultra luxury travel.
Yeah.
And specifically, the ultra-luxury ocean travel sector, suddenly that startup playbook isn't just useless, it's actively dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. It's the fastest way to fail.
Yeah. We're looking at a business landscape where moving fast and breaking things is the absolute fastest way to completely sink your reputation before your first customer even, unpacks their bag. You cannot put out a beta version of a luxury vacation.
No, you really can't. It is the defining zero margin for error industry. Because, when a consumer is parting with tens of thousands of dollars for a very specific emotional experience, any friction at all, like a late room service order or a poorly designed bathroom.
Or just a really confusing embarkation process. Right?
Exactly. Any of that permanently shatters the illusion. The brand trust is just gone. And in this market, to be honest, it really comes back.
So true. Well, today we're taking you on a deep dive into the business, the mechanics, and the actual tangible experience of ultra-luxury travel in 2026. We're looking at this massive disruptor in the space right now. It's a brand called Explora Journeys.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating case study.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the mission for this deep dive is to unpack how a brand that was built entirely from scratch is attempting to fundamentally redefine ocean travel. They are trying to engineer an experience that feels, less like a traditional cruise and much more like a private floating luxury hotel.
And to anchor this analysis for you, we are pulling heavily from a comprehensive 2026 industry guide. It was compiled by Yvon Jr. Blanchette.
Right.
He's a travel advisor and a cruise specialist over at Area Voyages. And he's documented exactly what this brand is doing, the operational mechanics behind the scenes, and really what their strategy signals for the future of high-end hospitality.
Yeah, and whether you are an experienced traveler, or maybe someone who's just fascinated by the psychology of high-end design, or even just curious about how a multi-billion-euro business venture operates, there is a masterclass here. A masterclass in consumer psychology and brand positioning.
It really is.
So let's start with the foundation. I kind of want to frame this with an analogy first.
Okay, go for it.
So think about this venture not like a tech startup trying to disrupt a market with, a new algorithm. Think of it more like a legacy automaker deciding to create an entirely new, dominant luxury brand from the ground up. It feels very similar to when Toyota decided to create Lexus back in the late 1980s.
Oh, I like that. That is actually the perfect mental model for this because, Toyota didn't just slap a premium badge on a Camry and then charge double for it.
Right. They didn't just change the logo.
Exactly. They built an entirely separate ecosystem of luxury engineered to a completely different tolerance level. But, and this is the key, they utilized the immense financial and supply chain backing of the parent company to actually make it happen. Explora Journeys is basically executing that Lexus strategy, but on a massive ocean-going scale.
Yeah, according to Yvonne's guide, Explora is the creation of the Aponte family. And for those of you who don't meticulously track the maritime shipping industry, the Aponte family owns the MSC Group, which was founded by Gianluigi Aponte back in 1970.
And the scale of the MSC Group, honestly, it's difficult to overstate. They are a global titan in container shipping. And then on the passenger side, MSC Cruises is the third largest cruise company in the entire world.
Which is huge.
Massive. They operate these massive floating cities that cater to thousands of passengers at a time. So they have deeply entrenched resources and just incredible leverage with shipbuilders and global ports.
So they're not some scrappy outsider.
I was looking at the timeline in Yvonne's analysis, and this project didn't just materialize when the Explora brand launched in 2021. The gears actually started turning way back in 2018.
Right.
What's wild is that the initial concept wasn't even to create a new brand at all. They originally just wanted to take a concept. They already had the MSC Yacht Club and basically build whole ships around that.
Yeah, the MSC Yacht Club is a really fascinating study in market segmentation all on its own. Because on their existing mass market megaships, MSC carved out this exclusive keycard access enclave. It essentially functions as a ship within a ship.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a VIP section. Exactly. Guests in the yacht club have their own private pool deck. They have a dedicated panoramic lounge, a private restaurant, and, 24-hour butler service. So they get the intimacy of a luxury product while still having access to the massive theaters and entertainment of the larger vessel.
I see. So the initial thought process was fairly straightforward, right? The yacht club is highly profitable. Guests obviously love it. So let's just go to a shipyard and commission 4 vessels that are essentially 100% yacht club.
Right, that was the initial plan, but then they hit the brakes. The Aponte family realized a really critical truth about ultra-luxury consumer psychology. You cannot capture the true pinnacle of the market, like the demographic that spends their summers at Aman resorts or the Four Seasons in Paris. You can't capture them with a mixed-use brand identity.
Wait, why not, though? I mean, if the physical room is beautiful and the butler is super attentive, why does the name painted on the side of the ship actually matter that much?
Well, it comes down to brand dilution, and honestly, the physical logistics of the journey itself. Imagine you are that ultra high net worth traveler. You might have a spectacular suite in Yacht Club, sure, but to get there, your black car might still have to pull up to a really crowded, chaotic mega terminal.
Right, you're still in the mix.
Yeah, you might find yourself walking past, like, a neon-lit water park or a super loud, bustling casino just to reach your private enclave. So the brand association in the consumer's mind is still heavily tethered to mass market high volume cruising.
It's guilt by association. The luxury is basically compromised by the context it's sitting in.
Precisely. To command true ultra-luxury pricing and to secure that unquestioning loyalty, both the hardware, so the physical vessel, and the software, the service, and the branding they have, to be completely insulated from day one.
Which makes sense.
So by pivoting away from that yacht club expansion and creating Explora Journeys as a totally separate, fully independent entity, they protected this new venture from any mass market connotations whatsoever.
But man, that pivot required a staggering amount of capital. I mean, we were looking at a total investment estimated at 3.5 billion euros.
Yeah, with a B.
Right. 3.5 billion. They went to the Italian shipbuilder Fincantieri, and they didn't just order the initial 4 ships they were thinking about. They expanded the order to 6. So Explora I launched in 2023, Explora 2 launched in 2024, and the guide highlights this major milestone arriving in July 2026 with Explora 3.
And Explora 3 is a really significant pivot point in the fleet's engineering because it is the first in their series to run on LNG, or liquefied natural gas, and the subsequent ships, Explora 4 and V coming in 2027 and Explora 6 in 2028, they'll continue pushing these next-generation green technologies.
Let's actually pause on the LNG aspect for a second because, that term gets thrown around a lot in corporate sustainability reports, and it starts to just sound like buzzwords. What does it actually mean to run a 64,000-ton luxury ship on liquefied natural gas? And why is it such a massive engineering hurdle?
It's a huge hurdle. So historically, the maritime industry has relied on heavy fuel oil, which is often called bunker fuel. It's cheap, it's very energy dense, but it is heavily polluting. So transitioning a vessel to LNG isn't just like putting premium gas in a standard car engine. It requires completely different infrastructure.
Right, because it's a gas.
Well, natural gas has to be cooled to minus 162 degrees Celsius just to remain in a liquid state.
Minus 162. Wow. So you essentially have to build like a giant hyper-pressurized thermos inside the hull of the ship.
That is exactly what it is. A massive, double-walled cryogenic tank. And because LNG is less energy dense by volume than heavy fuel oil, those tanks take up significantly more physical space within the ship's architecture.
Oh, I see. So it eats into the real estate.
Exactly. Every cubic meter dedicated to a cryogenic tank is a cubic meter you cannot use for a passenger suite or a restaurant or a spa. So Fincantieri had to fundamentally redesign the internal geometry of Explora 3 to accommodate this, and they had to do it without compromising the guest experience experience at all.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. But the payoff, however, is a drastic reduction in emissions. It virtually eliminates sulfur oxides and significantly cuts down nitrogen oxides and CO2.
Which circles us right back to that initial idea of the non-startup, right? Like when a consumer is booking a highly complex, very expensive vacation for 2027, they are evaluating risk. If some brand new boutique company promises they're building an LNG-powered luxury ship, the consumer naturally wonders, are they going to run out of money before this thing is even built?
Exactly. They worry about bankruptcy. But the MSC backing removes that friction completely. It tells the market, look, we have 3.5 billion euros, we have Fincantieri on retainer, and we have decades of heavy maritime logistics experience. Your deposit is completely safe.
Yeah, it provides instant institutional credibility in a market where trust is really the primary currency. And we see that calculated methodology in the physical scale they chose for these vessels too. According to the data, each Explora ship is designed to hold exactly 922 guests.
Right, which is a very specific number. It's not 500 and it's not 1,500.
Yeah, why 922? That seems so precise.
Well, the luxury cruise market generally bifurcates into two very distinct camps. On one side, you have small, intimate ships carrying maybe 250 to 450 guests. These feel like private yachts, which is great, but the trade-off is that they lack variety. You might only have 2 restaurants on board, and the nightlife is virtually non-existent.
Right, you're going to bed at 9 p.m.
Pretty much.
That's
But then on
fine.
the other side, you have the premium segment ships carrying over 2,000 people. There you get Broadway-style shows in 20 different dining venues, but you lose the intimacy. You're suddenly waiting in lines.
So by targeting exactly 922 guests, Explora is attempting to sort of thread the needle. Yvonne's guide describes the resulting atmosphere as a, quote, large boutique hotel.
And that's exactly what it feels like. It guarantees enough square footage to offer massive variety, multiple lounges, sprawling wellness centers, extensive dining options, but the guest count is kept low enough that the ship never actually feels overrun.
Yeah, you don't feel like cattle.
Exactly. There is a social energy, a real pulse to the evenings, but you can always find a quiet corner if you want one. It completely alters the behavioral psychology of the passengers.
And that behavioral psychology is heavily influenced by the actual physical spaces the guests inhabit,
Right.
Because a 3.5 billion euro investment means very little if the room the guest sleeps in feels compromised. And this is where Explora makes, I think, its most radical departure from traditional maritime architecture. They have completely erased the concept of a standard cabin.
They have, and this changes the entire economic and social structure of the vessel. For a century, the cruise industry has operated on this very strict hierarchy of real estate.
Yeah, a hierarchy of misery in some cases.
Yeah.
You have the interior cabins with absolutely no windows, buried deep in the belly of the ship. Above those, you get the porthole cabins. Above those, the entry-level balconies, which are often super cramped. And then finally, the massive suites at the top.
Right. But the guide makes it clear that Explora, much like its competitors Seabourn and Silversea, operates an all-suite fleet. But Explora actually takes the baseline standard further when it comes to outdoor space. There are no window-only suites.
Really? None at all?
None. The oceanfront suite with a private terrace is the absolute minimum point of entry. Every single passenger on the ship possesses a private outdoor space.
Wow. It kind of reminds me of the evolution of commercial aviation. Imagine boarding a long-haul flight where economy and premium economy have just been entirely ripped out, and the entire fuselage is just first-class pods.
That's a great comparison.
Right, the anxiety of missing out is just gone. You don't walk past a velvet rope and feel envious of someone else's vacation because you're all essentially in first class.
Exactly. Architectural equality basically eliminates class friction on board. Now, yes, higher tiers certainly exist. The guide mentions ocean penthouses, these sprawling ocean residences, and even an owner's residence for maximum privacy. But the key is that the guest in the entry-level suite is not receiving a compromised product.
So let's talk about that entry-level product, because the dimensions are staggering for a ship. The baseline suite is 377 square feet.
Yeah, that square footage ranks among the most generous in the ultra-luxury industry for a starting category. But building an entire ship full of large terraced suites is a massive structural puzzle.
How so?
Well, ships have a fixed width, right? The beam. If every single room must be placed on the outer edge of the hull so they can have a terrace, you're left with a massive amount of dark interior space in the center of the ship.
Oh, I see. And mass market ships usually fill that dark center space with hundreds of cheap interior cabins to maximize their revenue.
Exactly. But Explora sacrifices that potential ticket revenue to maintain brand purity. Instead of stuffing it with interior cabins, they utilize that central volume for wider corridors, larger back-of-house service areas, and really expansive public venues.
That's fascinating. It's a yield management strategy that relies entirely on commanding a high premium for every single guest, rather than relying on sheer volume.
Precisely. And the details inside those suites reflect a really heavy obsession with land-based hospitality. They actually brought in European interior architects and super yacht design studios to do the interiors.
Yeah, the guide lists in-room amenities like heated bathroom floors, premium bedding, espresso machines. But the detail that really highlights their specific target demographic, for me, is the in-suite Technogym fitness kit. Every single room comes with a yoga mat, a foam roller, and resistance bands.
Yeah, and the psychology behind that is actually profound. In a standard cramped hotel room, the space is purely functional, right? You sleep, you shower, and you leave. The confined space naturally pushes you out into the public area.
Right, you don't want to hang out in there.
Exactly. But when you provide 377 square feet, a private oceanfront terrace, an espresso machine, and a yoga mat, the suite transitions into a destination all by itself.
You completely change the rhythm of the guest's day. They don't have to rush up to a crowded gym at 7 a.m. just to stretch. They don't have to hurry to some buffet for a decent cup of coffee. They can spend the first 3 hours of their morning entirely in their own private sanctuary.
And operationally, this is brilliant. By encouraging guests to linger in their suites, you naturally disperse the flow of people across the ship. It hugely reduces the morning rush on the public venues. So ensuring that when guests do finally emerge, the restaurants and lounges feel calm and uncrowded.
Oh, that's so smart. And that natural dispersion is crucial, especially when we look at how they handle dining. Because if the private suites are designed to mimic a high-end resort, the culinary program has to meet the expectations of people who regularly dine in major global cities like London or New York.
Absolutely.
And Explorer's approach here represents, honestly, the final nail in the coffin for a century-old maritime tradition. The main dining room.
Yeah, the main dining room has been the operational heart of passenger ships since, well, the Titanic era. And the model is based entirely on banquet logistics. You have a cavernous hall, thousands of guests, and rigidly set seating times.
Right. You sit at table 42 at exactly 6:00 p.m. You order from a very standardized menu, and the galley basically operates like an assembly line, pushing out 2,000 plates of chicken in an hour.
It is an incredible feat of industrial efficiency, I will give it that, but it is the complete antithesis of modern luxury. Modern luxury demands autonomy, and Explora has completely abandoned the banquet model. There is no main dining room on the ship, period.
Wow. Instead, they built 9 distinct restaurants, 9 entirely separate culinary concepts for just 922 guests. And crucially, 8 of those 9 venues are included in the fare.
The logistical complexity of operating 9 distinct restaurants at sea is just immense, because you aren't just printing different menus, you're building separate galleys, you're sourcing entirely different supply chains, and hiring highly specialized culinary brigades for each one.
Yeah, Vivon's guide breaks down the venues, and the variety is really serious. You have Sakura, which explores Pan-Asian flavors from Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam, complete with a dedicated sex sommelier.
Right.
Then you have the Med Yacht Club, focusing on Mediterranean dishes. There is Fil Rouge for French-inspired international tasting menus, and the Emporium Marketplace for elevated all-day dining with sushi and rotisserie stations.
But the venue that truly highlights their commitment to hardware is Marble & Co. Grill. That's their European steakhouse. And the guide specifically notes that they operate an in-house dry ager and an integrated wine cellar right there on the ship.
Okay, having an in-house dry ager on a moving vessel sounds like an absolute nightmare for a chef.
Oh, it requires fanatical precision. Because dry aging beef requires a perfectly stable environment specifically concerning humidity, temperature, and airflow. And a ship is an inherently dynamic environment. You have the constant ambient salt air of the ocean, which can easily ruin the meat if it infiltrates the chamber.
Right, salt air gets into everything.
Exactly. And then you have the microscopic constant vibration of the ship's engines. That vibration can disturb the pellicle, which is the hard outer crust that forms on the beef during the aging process.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the vibration. So the fact that they engineered a sealed, stabilized environment just to dry age steaks on board really proves They are not cutting corners on the culinary infrastructure.
Not at all. And we have to emphasize the financial structure of this too. The all-inclusive model covers premium beverages ship-wide. They pour Moet Hennessy's Mercier Brut champagne by the glass as part of the complimentary selection. You are never signing a check for a cappuccino or a cocktail.
Which honestly brings up a glaring exception. Of the 9 dining venues, 8 are included. But one venue, named Anthology, carries a supplemental fee.
Yes.
So if the brand's entire value proposition is this frictionless, all-inclusive luxury, doesn't charging extra for a restaurant break the illusion? Why not just bake that cost into the ticket price and make it truly 100% inclusive?
On the surface, yeah, it looks contradictory, but the economics and the intent behind Anthology require a completely different framework. Anthology is not designed to be like a casual Tuesday dinner. It is positioned as an extreme special occasion tasting menu.
Oh, okay. The guide mentions they rotate world-renowned, often Michelin-starred guest chefs through that specific kitchen.
Exactly. And bringing a 2-star Michelin chef and their entire team of sous chefs on board, sourcing the hyper-specific, rare ingredients required for their signature dishes to, remote ports.
Right. You can't exactly run to the local market for that stuff.
Exactly. And then dedicating a highly trained front-of-house staff to a room that only seats a few dozen people. It is astronomically expensive. If Explora absorbed the cost of Anthology into the base fare, they would be forced to raise the ticket price for every single guest on the ship.
Even the guests who have absolutely no desire to sit through a complex 3-hour conceptual tasting menu.
Correct. By separating it with a supplemental fee, they preserve its exclusivity and its economic viability. It becomes an opt-in event. Furthermore, context really matters here. On most competing luxury lines, a steakhouse like Marble & Co. or an Asian venue like Sakura would routinely carry a cover charge.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Explora, including 8 diverse high-concept venues in the base fare, remains arguably the strongest culinary proposition in the 2026 ultra-luxury market.
The talent executing this food is also notable. They are actively poaching chefs from places like the Four Seasons Paris and the Hotel de Crillon. But, a Michelin-level chef in the kitchen is pretty useless if the waiter drops the plate or just ignores the guests.
So true.
Beautiful sweets and dry-aged steaks are the physical hardware of hospitality. You can buy those things. The software of the service culture is where the real battle for luxury dominance is actually fought.
Yes. Service is the great filter in high-end hospitality. You can spend 3.5 billion euros on Fincantieri steel, but if a guest feels mismanaged or ignored by a single crew member, the entire investment is rendered meaningless.
This is where Explora makes a really fascinating operational move. Yvonne's guide highlights an exclusive partnership to train their staff. They partnered with EHL, the École Hôtelière de Lausanne.
And EHL is widely acknowledged as the premier hospitality management school on the planet. I mean, it is the institution that shapes the general managers of the world's most elite heritage hotels.
And Explora isn't just hiring like a few EHL graduates for their corporate office in Geneva. Every single host on board goes through a Guest Experience Foundations program executed by EHL certified trainers. This level of institutional integration is completely unique in the cruise sector.
It really is.
But what does that actually mean for the guests sitting at the table? The guide says the brand philosophy is anchored in, quote, modern European service. What is that?
Well, to understand modern European service, we kind of have to look at what it is reacting against. Traditional maritime luxury was forged in the early 20th century, and it relies heavily on rigid, very visible codes of subservience.
Right. The white gloves, the butler standing at attention in the corner, being called sir or madam at the end of every single sentence.
Exactly. It is highly scripted, it's deeply formal, and for a contemporary traveler, it often just feels stifling or, frankly, performative. Modern European service strips away all those rigid scripts. It relies on emotional intelligence, warmth, and intuition.
Intuition.
Yeah. It is the art of treating guests like peers rather than royalty. It's about anticipating their needs without hovering constantly in their peripheral vision.
I think of it like the difference between a hired butler and a truly brilliant dinner party host. A traditional butler stands stiffly in the corner, just waiting for a direct command. But a great dinner party host is chatting, laughing, and yet somehow magically places a fresh drink in your hand the exact moment you wanted one, without ever interrupting your conversation to ask.
That is the perfect analogy. And that level of intuition requires intense psychological training. You are teaching young hospitality professionals how to read micro expressions. You are teaching them deep situational awareness. Like, do they notice that a guest is left-handed and adjust the table setting accordingly without making a whole show of it?
Right. And the guide details how this works in practice, too. They don't hand you a 10-page questionnaire on embarkation day to figure out your favorite pillow or your dietary quirks. They learn through observation. So by day 2, the bartender just knows your preferred gin. The dining team navigates your gluten allergy without you having to loudly announce it to the table every single night.
Reflection is completely removed. But here is the monumental business challenge Explora faces: scaling that intuition.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. It's easy to have intuitive service if you run a tiny 6-room bed and breakfast, right? You just hire one incredibly empathetic person. But Explora is operating ships with 922 guests. They're employing hundreds of crew members, and they're scaling to a fleet of 6 ships by 2028. How do you possibly scale empathy across thousands of rotating employees?
That is the precise reason they require the EHL partnership. They cannot just rely on the chance hiring of naturally intuitive people. They have to build a strict institutional framework that mass produces that specific soft skill.
Wow. Mass-producing empathy.
Basically, yeah. The EHL curriculum standardizes the mechanics of empathy. They create a universal language of service across the entire fleet, ensuring that the bartender on Explora 6 in 2028 reacts to a guest's subtle cues exactly the same way the bartender on Explora does today.
It's an attempt to turn the intangible magic of hospitality into a repeatable science. And honestly, if they succeed, that EHL trained culture becomes an impenetrable moat. Competitors simply cannot replicate that with money alone. So we have the Aponte Financial Foundation, we have the all-terrace architecture, the death of the main dining room, and this highly engineered European service. But who is this all actually built for?
And the question of positioning is where so many brands falter. They try to cast way too wide a net. Explora Journeys' greatest strength is its absolute clarity on who they are serving, and just as importantly, who they are actively refusing to serve.
Let's start with the target demographic. The guide describes the ideal client as an experienced traveler who typically frequents grand, land-based luxury hotels like the Amman and Mandarin Oriental regulars we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They want the exact equivalent of that experience, but mobilized across the ocean.
And this client values aesthetic calm, they value generous space, and a complete lack of formality. The design language of the ships really reflects this. You won't find traditional maritime tropes. There are no brass ship wheels or nautical stripes anywhere.
Thank goodness.
Right. The architecture is decidedly contemporary. They integrate curated art collections, known as the Galleria d'Art, directly into the public spaces. It creates an environment that feels much more like a modern art museum intersecting with a high-end residential complex.
There is also a major operational shift regarding solo travelers that I found fascinating. Because the cruise industry is notoriously hostile to people traveling alone.
Oh, incredibly hostile.
If you want a cabin to yourself, you're usually hit with a single supplement, meaning you have to pay up to 200% of the fare just to cover the revenue. The cruise line loses from not having a second person in that room buying drinks and shore excursions.
Yeah, it is a highly punitive economic model. But Explora introduced a program called A Journey of One, where they offer 0 single supplements on over 500 of their itineraries.
That is wildly generous. I mean, they are willingly taking a massive hit on potential secondary revenue for those cabins.
It is, but it's a very calculated acquisition strategy. The demographic of independent, affluent solo travelers is expanding rapidly worldwide. By removing that financial penalty, Explora captures immense goodwill and fierce loyalty from a highly lucrative segment of the market that feels ignored or, frankly, exploited by legacy brands.
That makes a lot of sense. And the itineraries themselves are also tailored to this very specific mindset. They aren't doing the frantic port-a-day Caribbean loops where you're just rushing constantly. Yvonne's guide emphasizes longer stays and overnight port calls. So if you are in Rome or Barcelona, you aren't forced to sprint back to the ship at 5 p.m. You can actually stay out and experience the city's nightlife and dining scene.
And their approach to shore excursions, which they rebrand as destination experiences, perfectly mirrors the onboard philosophy. They reject the mass tourism model entirely.
No more following someone with a colored umbrella.
Exactly. You are not boarding a coach bus with 50 other people. They focus on private, authentic access. So maybe a private tour of a historical archive, or an intimate truffle hunting excursion with a local family in Italy.
And for the truly committed, they offer extended journeys of 20 to 30 nights. They're even preparing an inaugural 128-day world journey for 2029. but spending a quarter of a year on a ship requires phenomenal hardware.
And it requires a very comprehensive approach to well-being, which is another core pillar of their positioning. They call it the ocean state of mind, focusing on the psychological and physical benefits of proximity to the sea.
The wellness facilities they've built are massive. 11 treatment rooms, a full thermal circuit with hydrotherapy pools, salt caves, heated marble loungers. And importantly, access to this thermal suite is included in the base fare, not locked behind some annoying daily upcharge. They have a massive fitness center equipped with Pilates reformers and personalized sleep programs. It operates almost like a dedicated floating wellness retreat.
It does, but the clarity of this positioning is really best understood by looking at the demographics they deliberately exclude.
Yeah, Yvonne's guide is explicit here. Explora Journeys is not a family line. If you are traveling with young children who want massive water slides, loud entertainment, and sprawling kids clubs, this product is fundamentally not built for you.
And equally, it is not a polar expedition company. In the current luxury travel market, the expedition sector taking wealthy clients to Antarctica or the high Arctic is absolutely booming.
It really is.
Competitors are building ships with ice-breaking hulls, and they're carrying onboard submarines and helicopters. Explora has entirely opted out of that arms race.
And this is where I have to really question the business logic for a second. If you have 3.5 billion euros to recoup, why intentionally limit your customer base? Families represent a massive chunk of wealth. The expedition market commands the highest ticket prices in the entire industry. Why refuse to adapt the ships to capture those highly lucrative demographics?
Because in the luxury sector, the moment you try to be everything to everyone, you become nothing to anyone. It is the sheer power of exclusionary marketing.
A strategy of deliberate alienation.
Exactly. Every single edition requires a compromise. If you bolt a water slide onto the top deck to attract families, you instantly shatter the aesthetic calm that your core demographic, the couple seeking quiet luxury, is paying a huge premium for.
Right.
And if you engineer the hull to break polar ice, you have to fundamentally compromise the open-air, terrace-heavy architecture that makes the ship so brilliant in the Mediterranean. By unapologetically stating what they are not, they amplify what they are.
They just draw a hard line in the sand. We do not do submarines and we do not do mascots.
Yeah.
We do Mediterranean Dolce Vita, zero friction service, and immense personal space.
And this clarity attracts a highly specific, fiercely loyal demographic. When a consumer recognizes that a product is built explicitly and exclusively for their specific tastes, price resistance just plummets. For the right client, as the guide says, this is the most complete answer on the market in 2026. So true. Let's try to bring this all together. We have covered the complete architecture of a modern luxury brand today. To synthesize the 5 key pillars that make Explora Journeys such a formidable disruptor in 2026, first, we have the origin and credibility. The 3.5 billion euro backing of the Aponte family and the MSC group proves this is a highly capitalized, long-term industrial play. It completely eliminates consumer risk.
Yes. And second, the structural revolution of the suites. By establishing a massive 377 square foot oceanfront terrace suite as the absolute minimum standard, they erased the hierarchy of standard cabins and fundamentally altered the flow of the guest experience.
Third, the total reconstruction of the culinary program. Abandoning the banquet-style main dining room for 9 distinct high-concept venues, 8 of which are included, sets a totally new line for inclusive gastronomy.
Fourth, the operational masterstroke of the EHL partnership. By institutionalizing modern European service, they are actively attempting to scale empathy and intuition across a growing fleet, basically replacing old-world formality with genuine warmth. And finally, the discipline of their positioning. They are laser-focused on the contemporary, design-conscious luxury traveler, and they possess the corporate courage to actively turn away the family and expedition markets just to protect their brand purity.
Absolutely.
Even if you never plan to step foot on a ship, the strategic lessons here are vital. Partnering with the absolute best to scale soft skills. Eliminating your lowest-tier product to permanently elevate brand perception. And realizing that deciding who your product is not for is just as important as deciding who it is for.
It is a masterclass in building an uncompromising brand architecture from a blank sheet of paper.
It truly is. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a broader philosophical question about where all of this is actually heading. We started this deep dive talking about the precision of engineering a brand. Explora Journeys has spent billions of euros to ensure that stepping onto their ships feels exactly like walking into the finest, most perfectly controlled luxury hotels in Milan or Paris. They have conquered the logistics. They have insulated the guest from every possible friction point. But it makes me wonder if ocean travel becomes so perfectly engineered, so entirely indistinguishable from staying at a pristine, climate-controlled land resort. Do we eventually lose the unpredictability, the romance, and the fundamental wildness of being out on the open sea? If the illusion of the floating hotel is executed perfectly, do we forget that we are on an ocean at all? Something to think about.
You've been listening to Beyond the Horizon, the podcast by Area Voyages. The full article for this episode is available at www.areavoyages.com. Remember to like, share the podcast, and leave a review to help promote our work. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Until next time, safe travels.